This day and time. What happened today, years ago.
You're someone who wants the real story, right? Those key moments in history understood properly, but without drowning in tiny details. That's what we do here.
And today we have a real classic lined up. A naval story packed with strategy, technology, and just incredible human drama.
We're doing a deep dive into the hunt and sinking of the German battleship Bismarck, May 1941.
Exactly. We've looked through, historical accounts, technical specs, battle analyses.
All to pull out the really crucial bits for you.
Our mission, if you like, is to get to the heart of why the Bismarck matters its place in naval history, its impact on the Battle of the Atlantic.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Why was the Bismarck such a huge deal? What was happening in the Atlantic early in World War II?
Well, Britain's survival absolutely depended on those Atlantic supply lines. Convoys bringing food, fuel, weapons from North America. They were the lifeline.
Cut that lifeline and Britain's in serious trouble.
Huh.
The German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, they knew this.
Oh, absolutely. Admiral Raeder's whole strategy was about strangling Britain. Surface raiders like battleships and cruisers, and of course the U-boats. That was the plan.
And they'd had some success with surface raiders before Bismarck, right? But it wasn't easy.
No, ships like Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, they did cause disruption, Operation Berlin, for instance.
Yeah.
But the Royal Navy was just bigger. They had bases everywhere. It was always a risk for the German ships.
So sending out the Bismarck was a major step up, a real escalation.
It really was. A calculated gamble by Raeder. He wanted a big win in the Atlantic, maybe boost the surface fleet's image, keep Hitler investing in these big ships, especially with the invasion of Russia looming. Operation Barbarossa was just around the corner.
And the ship itself took on this almost mythical status, didn't it? More than just steel and guns.
Definitely. The British saw it as this almost unsinkable sea monster, and that feeling, that fear just exploded after the hood went down so fast.
Which led straight to Churchill's famous order, sink the Bismarck. You really feel the desperation in that.
You do. It wasn't just about sinking a ship anymore. It was national pride, strategic necessity. And when they finally did sink it, well, it was a massive moment. It changed things, naval strategy, the whole Atlantic battle.
And strategic weight, got it. But what about the ship itself? Why did it seem unsinkable? Let's get into the design.
Right, so the Bismarck's design really started in the mid-30s. It was Germany's answer to France building new battleships like the Richelieu class. Naval treaties were kind of falling apart. The arms race was heating up again.
And wasn't there some debate about the main guns? They didn't settle on the 15-inch right away?
No, initially they talked about 330 millimeters, then 350 millimeters, but Hitler actually stepped in. He wanted the biggest possible 380 millimeter, the 15-inch guns, maximum firepower. At the same time, you had the Anglo-German naval agreement in 1935 trying to limit the German fleet.
But they kind of ignored those limits with Bismarck, didn't they?
Pretty much, yeah. The final displacement was way over the treaty limits. Design standard was over 41,000 tons. It showed they weren't really sticking to the rules, which obviously made the Allies very suspicious.
So the specs, what made it so impressive on paper?
Okay, so it was big. 250 meters long, 36-meter beam. Standard displacement, like I said, 41,700 tons, but fully loaded, over 50,000. Huge.
And fast, too.
Very fast for a battleship. Steam turbines, 150,000 horsepower, designed for 30 knots, and it actually went a bit faster in trials. Range was decent, around 8,500 to 9,300 nautical miles at cruising speed. Important for a commerce raider.
And firepower.
Massive. 8 15-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, then 12 5.9-inch secondary guns, plus a lot of anti-aircraft guns, and it carried 4 Arado float planes for reconnaissance.
Okay, now the armor. That was key to its reputation, right?
Absolutely key. Exceptionally well armored. The main belt along the waterline was 320 millimeters thick. That's like 12.6 inches. Vital protection. Upper belt was 145 millimeters. Turret faces, 360 millimeter. Deck armor against plunging shells, 50 to 120 millimeter. Anti-splinter protection all over. They even calculated this theoretical immunity zone against 16-inch shells at certain ranges. Plus, a sophisticated torpedo defense system, layers to absorb underwater hits. And it had early radar FUMO 23 systems. Still developing tech, but it was there. It was a stable gun platform too, though apparently tricky to handle when changing propeller speeds.
Sounds like a floating fortress.
Yeah.
But you mentioned compromises earlier. Where did they cut corners or make trade-offs?
Well, it's always a balance, isn't it? Heavy armor, big guns, and high speed for raiding. It wasn't perfectly optimized for raiding across the huge Atlantic.
So
The steam turbines gave it speed, yes, but they were thirsty. Diesel engines would have given it much better range, which is crucial for long raiding missions. Fuel became a real Achilles heel.
Oh, okay.
Some argue there was this sort of strategic confusion in German shipbuilding then. Was it for fleet battles like in the North Sea, or for Atlantic raiding? It tried to be both, maybe wasn't perfectly suited for either. Its design strengths, heavy armor, bursts of speed, arguably better for the North Sea than the long Atlantic chase it ended up in.
That's a really interesting point. Designed for one thing, used for another. So how did it stack up against the competition, the Allied battleships of the time?
Good question. If you put Bismarck side by side with, say, HMS King George V or the American North Carolina class, you see differences. U.S. ships like North Carolina had a way better range, big advantage in the Atlantic.
Dang firepower.
Bismarck 15-inch guns were similar to Hood or the French Richelieu, but HMS Rodney had 9 16-inch guns. North Carolina also had 9 16-inch guns. So powerful, but not necessarily the most powerful out there.
And the armor, while good, wasn't invincible.
Exactly. Highly rated, especially that main belt, but as events showed, not unsinkable. Each navy had different priorities, different design philosophies, strengths and weaknesses all around.
Right. So the ship is ready. Operation Rheinübung begins. What was the mission exactly?
Okay, Operation Rheinübung Rhine exercise, May 1941. Bismarck, flagship of Admiral Lütjen's, and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen sail into the North Atlantic. Primary goal, smash Allied convoys, help blockade Britain, basically repeat earlier raiding successes, but with the biggest ship they had.
And Admiral Raeder had other motives too, didn't you say? Something about influencing Hitler.
Yes, probably. A big success for Bismarck just before Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia, could show Hitler the value of the surface fleet, maybe secure more resources for it. Politics, you know.
But the force that sailed wasn't what was originally planned. It was smaller.
Much smaller. The plan was for Scharnhorst and Gneisenau to join them, a powerful squadron. But they were damaged, undergoing repairs. Bismarck's sister ship, Tirpitz, wasn't ready yet. And they didn't have light cruisers with the range to go with them. They had supply ships and tankers pre-positioned, but the fighting force was just those 2 ships.
Just Bismarck and Prinz Eugen. That seems like a huge risk, especially given German naval doctrine usually stressed concentration of force.
It was a massive gamble. It went against Raeder's own ideas, and Lütjens himself wasn't keen. He preferred a stronger force. But, you know, internal Kriegsmarine politics, the timing with Barbarossa, it seems they pushed ahead despite the risks.
What were Lütjen's actual orders? Did he have much leeway?
Raeder's orders were pretty clear. Don't fight enemy battleships of equal strength if you can avoid it. Conserve your strength. Let Prinz Eugen go after the merchants. Only fight warships if you absolutely have to, and don't take big risks. Lütjens apparently argued for a delay, wanted a bigger force, but was overruled.
So off they go. When did the British realize they were out?
They left Gotenhofen late on May 18th or early 19th, sailed through the Kattegat, the passage between Denmark and Sweden, and crucially, they were spotted by a Swedish cruiser, the Gotland, and the Swedes told the British naval attaché in Stockholm. Big break for the British. Then the German ships stopped briefly in a fjord near Bergen in Norway.
And this is where a mistake happened. A critical one. Bismarck didn't fully refuel there. Why exactly is debated, but it seems like a major oversight. And it had huge consequences later. Limited their options, basically started a chain reaction. Meanwhile, the RAF flew over, spotted them in Norway, confirmed it. The Admiralty knew a breakout into the Atlantic was happening.
Surprise gone. Okay, so they head north towards the Denmark Strait. How did the British respond then?
Swiftly. As Bismarck and Prinz Eugen entered the Denmark Strait, that gap between Greenland and Iceland, the British cruisers, HMS Suffolk and Norfolk, both with radar, picked them up. Started shadowing.
Radar playing a key role already.
A huge role. They radioed the position back. The Admiralty immediately sent Vice Admiral Holland with HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, and the new battleship HMS Prince of Wales to intercept.
Hood versus Bismarck, the showdown. What happened when they met?
Early morning, May 24th. 05.52, Hood opens fire, long range. Holland initially makes a mistake, targets Prinz Eugen first, which was leading, quickly corrected his main tactic. Close the range, fast.
Hood's deck armor wasn't as strong as its side belt armor. By closing the range, incoming shells would have a flatter trajectory, hopefully hitting the thick belt or maybe skipping off the deck rather than plunging down through the thinner deck armor into the magazines. Risky, but understandable given Hood's known weakness.
But closing like that had downsides too.
It did. The angle of approach meant neither Hood nor Prince of Wales could use their rear guns initially, less firepower, and they presented a bigger target profile to the Germans. Plus, one of Prince of Wales's forward turrets malfunctioned early on. Not ideal. Suffolk and Norfolk tried to join in, but they were too far back.
Any other factors at play? Weather? Positioning?
Yeah, the Germans had the weather gauge. Wind and spray were blowing towards the British ships, making it harder for their optical rangefinders. And Holland kept Prince of Wales tucked in close behind Hood, which probably made it easier for the German gunners to range on Hood.
But Prince of Wales, despite being brand new, actually hit Bismarck.
She did. 3 hits. 1 damaged a boat and the catapult. Another hit the bow, didn't explode though, but the third one, an underwater hit. That was important. Flooded a generator room, damaged a bulkhead to a boiler room, caused some machinery damage, flooding, steam pipe burst, casualties. Drew first blood, you could say.
Meanwhile, the Germans held fire initially. Lütjens was hesitant.
For a few minutes, yeah, until December 555. Reports suggest Lütjens hesitated, maybe remembering his orders to avoid big fights. But Captain Lindemann on Bismarck got impatient as shells started landing close, supposedly shouted something like, "I won't let my ship be shot out from under my backside. Open fire!"
Oh, okay.
Early German hits started a fire on Hood's boat deck, ammo for the 4-inch guns. But it didn't cause the main explosion, not yet. There's still some debate which German ship actually landed the fatal blow later.
And then Holland ordered a turn to bring more guns to bear.
Exactly. Around 06.00, he ordered a turn to port. This would allow the rear turrets on both Hood and Prince of Wales to fire. Should have significantly increased their firepower. But it also meant turning across the German line of fire.
And it was during that turn.
It was during that turn. A salvo from Bismarck fired from about 9 miles away. The crew on Prince of Wales saw the shells straddle Hood near the mainmast. Then, just a massive explosion, a huge pillar of flame. The ship broke in two, sank incredibly fast, maybe 3 minutes, gone.
Devastating. Over 1,400 men lost, only 3 survivors. What did they think caused it at the time?
The Admiralty's initial thought was a 15-inch shell penetrated a main magazine. Boom. But finding the wreck in 2001 and later studies, it's more complex. Well, a direct magazine hit is still very possible. But another theory is the fire on the boat deck spread to a 4-inch magazine, which then set off the main 15-inch magazines. Maybe fuel oil played a part too. Some forensic analysis even suggests the bow damage seen on the wreck might be from implosion as it sank, not a forward magazine explosion. So still some debate, but the result was catastrophic.
A brutal lesson about battlecruiser design.
Absolutely. Hood was fast, powerful, but that trade-off on armor, it proved fatal, a terrible warning about modern naval guns. It really shook the Royal Navy.
And Bismarck didn't escape unscathed either. You mentioned the hits from Prince of Wales. How bad was the damage?
It is significant. Flooding forward, about 1,000 tons of fuel lost or unreachable in damaged tanks, speed reduced, a slight list, and crucially, leaking oil, a visible trail.
The oil slick, that's important.
Very. Damage control tried to stop the flooding, tried to jury-rig fuel lines, but failed. Lütjens didn't want to slow down too much initially, but eventually had to, down to maybe 22 knots, to try and plug holes near a boiler room. That failed too, so they shut that boiler down. Max speed now down to about 28 knots, and the fuel situation was getting serious under 3,000 tons left after the damage and not refueling properly in Norway. The original mission, raiding convoys, was basically impossible now. Surprise was gone too, with Suffolk and Norfolk still shadowing.
So Lütjens decides to abort and head for repairs. But where?
This was a critical decision. He decided not to pursue the damaged Prince of Wales. He ordered Prince Eugen to detach and try commerce raiding on its own. And he chose to head for Saint Nazaire in occupied France.
France, not back to Norway.
Right. Lindemann, the captain, apparently favored Norway, shorter, maybe safer route. But Lütjens chose France. Longer route kept him in areas where the British could concentrate forces from the UK and Gibraltar. And that longer route made the fuel shortage even more critical. The tactical win of sinking Hood was starting to look like a strategic trap.
So the hunt is truly on. Sink the Bismarck. What forces did the British throw into this?
Everything they could spare. It was an all-out effort. Admiral Tovey with the home fleet, HMS King George V, Repulse, the carrier Victorious, Force H steaming up from Gibraltar under Admiral Somerville carrier Ark Royal, Renown, Sheffield. The battleship Rodney was pulled off convoy duty, cruisers, destroyers. A huge net was closing. Plus, about 10 Allied convoys were at sea, making it even more urgent to get Bismarck.
And Bismarck is trying to shake them off. Bleeding oil, low on fuel.
Lütjens tried maneuvering, turning suddenly on the shadowing cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk, trying to make them back off. And for a while, on May 25th, after turning southeast towards France, he actually managed it. Suffolk lost radar contact in bad weather.
a glimmer of hope for them?
Maybe, but temporary. The fuel situation was so bad, he had to keep heading pretty directly for France. No fuel for fancy evasive maneuvers. It's a huge ocean, but his options were narrowing. You had surface ships, U-boats ordered to help Bismarck, and aircraft all involved.
And after losing contact, how did they find it again?
They lost it for about 31 hours. A long time. Then, on May 26th, a crucial breakthrough. An RAF Coastal Command Catalina flying boat.
The WWII Catalina.
That's the one. Piloted by a British officer, but actually had a U.S. Navy observer, Lieutenant Leonard B. Smith, as co-pilot. They spotted the oil slick. That gave the Navy the position they desperately needed. Then Swordfish from Ark Royal confirmed the sighting.
And didn't Litchens make a mistake with radio silence around then?
He did. On May 25th, while they were still lost, he sent a long radio message back to Germany. Maybe he thought he'd shaken the pursuit. But British radio direction finding picked it up, got a better fix on his position, narrowed the search area significantly. A costly mistake.
So Bismarck is heading for France, getting closer to air cover. But the Royal Navy knows where it is, and HMS Ark Royal is closing in. What was the last chance for the British?
It really came down to Ark Royal's planes, specifically the Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers. Old biplanes, fabric-covered, slow. They looked totally obsolete.
String bags.
Exactly. But they were the only thing that could reach Bismarck in time and potentially slow it down before it got under Luftwaffe protection. And the weather was atrocious. A force 9 gale, huge waves, rain, low cloud, getting dark, horrendous flying conditions.
And didn't the first attack go wrong?
Hilariously, tragically almost.
Yeah.
The first wave went after the wrong ship. They attacked HMS Sheffield, one of their own cruisers, shadowing Bismarck. Bad communication, terrible weather. Fortunately, their torpedoes had faulty magnetic detonators and didn't explode. Sheffield dodged them.
Close call. But the second attack?
The second attack was the one. 15 Swordfish took off around 7:10 p.m., attacked just before 9 p.m. The bravery was just incredible.
Flying into that storm against that ship's AA fire?
Unbelievable. Pilots like Jock Moffat flying maybe 20 feet off the waves, 90 miles an hour, straight into heavy flak from Bismarck's main guns, secondary guns, everything. They pressed on, got multiple hits, maybe 2 or 3 confirmed.
And one of those hits was the killer blow.
Absolutely. One torpedo, very likely Moffat's, hit the stern. It jammed the rudders hard over to port about 12 degrees and wrecked the steering gear. Irreparable at sea.
So the ship couldn't steer.
Couldn't steer properly at all. It was forced into this uncontrollable circle or slow turn, heading back towards the British ships. It couldn't escape. That single torpedo hit sealed its fate.
Slow, old biplanes crippling the pride of the German Navy. It's an amazing story.
It really is. A stunning demonstration of naval air power, especially torpedoes. Kind of a David and Goliath moment in technology terms. Showed battleships weren't invincible from the air. The combination of weather, basic tech, sheer guts. It was almost unbelievable it worked. Human factor skill, determination, luck were decisive.
And Litchens knew the game was up then.
He must have. His final messages went out. Ship unmaneuverable. We'll fight to the last shell. Long live the Fuhrer. Hitler radioed back promising help, but nothing could reach them in time.
So the final act. Bismarck, crippled, circling. What happened during the night?
Captain Vian's destroyers Cossack, Sikh, Maori, Zulu, and the Polish destroyer Purin moved in during the night. They harried Bismarck, fired torpedoes, used their guns, didn't score any more critical hits, but kept the German crew on edge, exhausted them, used up some of Bismarck's ammo, constant harassment.
And then the big guns arrived in the morning.
Morning of May 27th, Tovey arrives with King George V and Rodney, plus the cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire. The final battle began around 9 a.m.
But it wasn't really a battle, was it? More like target practice.
Pretty much. Bismarck couldn't maneuver, couldn't keep a steady course for his own gunners. The British battleships just pummeled it, closing the range dramatically. Rodney got as close as maybe 2,700 yards point-blank range for those guns.
Unbelievable.
They systematically knocked out its turrets, smashed the superstructure, started huge fires. All Bismarck's main guns were silent within about half an hour. The whole thing lasted, well, accounts vary, maybe 100 minutes, maybe closer to 3 hours. But the outcome was inevitable. It was the systematic destruction of a crippled ship.
But it took a tremendous amount of punishment before it sank.
It did, which speaks volumes about its construction, its armor. It absorbed hundreds, maybe thousands of shells. Its fighting ability was gone quickly, but the hull integrity was incredible. It floated long after it was effectively dead. shows the power of naval gunfire, but also the resilience of that design. Even when overwhelmed, you can only imagine the horror for the crew inside.
And then the sinking itself. Still some controversy there, right? Scuttled or sunk by the British.
Yeah, that debate has raged for years. After the pounding, Bismarck was a wreck, burning, but still afloat. The British battleships were low on fuel and pulled away. Then the cruiser HMS Dorsetshire moved in and fired more torpedoes.
So did the torpedoes sink it, or did the Germans scuttle it?
The German survivors always maintained that scuttling charges were set. Commander O'Eels gave the order to prevent capture, a final act of defiance. The British perspective was that the sheer weight of shell and torpedo damage was decisive. It would have sunk anyway. Modern analysis, especially after finding the wreck.
What does the wreck show?
It suggests both probably played a part. The British bombardment turned it into a helpless wreck. Scuttling likely hastened the end. The wreck shows evidence of massive external damage and internal explosions consistent with scuttling. It's tied up with national pride too, of course. It finally went under around 10:40 a.m. May 27th.
And the human cost was immense.
Horrific. Over 2,200 men on board. Only about 115, maybe 116 survived.
And the rescue efforts were cut short.
Yes. HMS Dorsetshire and HMS Maori picked up 110 men, but then there was a U-boat alarm, maybe real, maybe false, and the British ships pulled out, fearing for their own safety. Standard procedure in wartime, but brutal. Hundreds of German sailors were left in the water. A German U-boat and a weather ship found only 5 more later. A terrible end.
So Bismarck is gone. What did that mean strategically? What were the consequences?
Huge consequences. Firstly, it pretty much ended major German surface raider operations in the Atlantic. The loss was too great.
So the focus shifted.
Completely. Allowed the Allies to better protect the convoys. The Kriegsmarine doubled down on the U-boat campaign. Hitler reportedly lost faith in his big surface ships after this. They became a fleet in being tied down Allied resources just by existing in port, but rarely risked in major operations.
And it proved something about air power.
Definitely. Showed even the mightiest battleship was vulnerable to aircraft, especially torpedo planes. Reinforced the rise of the aircraft carrier. The sinking of Hood and Bismarck in different ways really marked the beginning of the end for the battleship era. It accelerated that shift to carrier task forces.
In morale.
Massive boost for the Allies, especially Britain. Revenge for Hood. A huge blow to German naval prestige and morale.
It also showed the limits of Germany's strategy, relying on single powerful ships.
Exactly. Trying to raid commerce with individual ships against the Royal Navy, with its global reach, bases, intelligence, ability to concentrate force, it was always going to be difficult. Once Bismarck was damaged and found, the British could just bring overwhelming numbers to bear. It showed the weakness of that raiding strategy against a superior naval power.
And the wreck itself, found decades later, added another layer to the story.
Finding it in 1989 by Dr. Ballard was incredible, deep down west of France. Surprisingly intact in many ways. Though the stern was broken off, turrets had fallen out, you could still see Nazi insignia.
Did it answer questions about the sinking?
It provided a lot of forensic evidence, helped clarify the debate about scuttling versus battle damage. James Cameron's expeditions later looked closely at the torpedo damage to the rudder, confirming how severe it was. Studying the wreck continues to give insights. It's designated a war grave now, German property, protected, rightly so, respecting the men lost. But the fascination continues, historians, enthusiasts. It's just such a powerful story.
So summing up this deep dive, a short, dramatic life for the Bismarck.
Incredibly short. A symbol of power, challenging the Royal Navy, sunk on its very first mission. It's a case study in everything. Technology, strategy, tactics, intelligence, human error, bravery, luck.
Its advanced design wasn't enough.
Couldn't overcome strategic mistakes, logistical problems like fuel, and that vulnerability to air power. That swordfish hit on the rudder. Symbolic of the changing tide of naval warfare, the rise of the carrier.
And the impact was huge. Allied morale up, German surface strategy crippled.
Absolutely. It's a timeless lesson in naval warfare. Design, logistics, decisions under pressure, technology, chance, all playing a part. And the human cost, always the human cost. Pride, courage, endurance on both sides, and ultimately, tragedy. Its legacy isn't just in history books, it's a reminder of how warfare evolves and the price paid. A true naval epic.
A powerful story indeed. So we've covered the Bismarck's strategic role, its design strengths and weaknesses, that fateful voyage, the incredible hunt, the swordfish attack, the final battle, and its lasting impact. A reminder that even the mightiest weapon can be brought down.
Which maybe leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Given all the power and technology packed into the Bismarck, what does its fate tell us about the limits of hardware? How much do determination, luck, and perhaps unforeseen weaknesses still shape the outcome of conflict, even today?
Something to think about. If you want to explore more, the Battle of the Atlantic or the evolution of naval tech in WWII are fascinating topics. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more history daily.